Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Jennifer Rubiello. I'm the State Director for Environment Florida. We're a statewide citizen-supported environmental advocacy group. We are here today to release a new report that documents fracking's harms to our environment and climate over the last decade. I'm joined here today by St. Petersburg City Council members Darden Rice and Steve Cornell, as well as Dr. Les Cole, founder of the St. Petersburg Health and Wellness, and Rick Hamilton, the owner of Creative Soul Studio. Here today as well with us are Reverend Danny Bennett and Andy Bell from Sunshine State Interfaith Power and Light, as well as Florida Food and Water Watch, Oath Pinellas, and other community members. And Council Member Carl Nurse as well. First, I'm going to make a few remarks and review the key findings from our report, and then I'm going to turn it over to each of the speakers who are going to talk more about each of those points. And then we'll wrap up and certainly have a little time for questions. Our message today is clear. The numbers in our new report, Fracking by the Numbers, don't lie. For the past decade, fracking has been a nightmare for our drinking water, our open lands, and our climate, as well as our public health. That's why we are so thankful that the St. Petersburg City Council is considering passing an ordinance that would ban fracking and the storage and transportation of fracking wastewater, and joining cities all across the country that have done the same, including Los Angeles and Pittsburgh. Our study, Fracking by the Numbers, which was written along with the Frontier Group, quantifies how over 137,000 wells were permitted over the last decade have harmed the nation's air, water, and climate. The report also paints a really frightening picture of fracking's harms, including contaminated water, the dangers of toxic chemicals, and global warming pollution, which we're going to hear again more of from each of our speakers. Using all the data available from federal and state government entities, the report first found that fracking wells across the country released at least 5.3 billion pounds of global warming methane pollution in a single year. So just to put that in perspective in terms that people understand, that's the same amount of methane pollution as that's produced by 22 coal-fired power plants in a single year. Methane is a pollutant that's 86 times more potent than carbon dioxide over the course of 20 years, and it's released at multiple steps during the fracking process. So this figure represents just a fraction of fracking's climate impacts. But now I want to turn it over to St. Petersburg City Council member Darden Rice to talk more about how methane is a concern for our climate and for our city.
Thanks, Jennifer, and I am so glad to be standing here today with my colleagues, City Council member Steve Cornell and Carl Nurse, our advocacy leaders in the community, our public health leaders, our faith leaders. This is an important issue, and thank you for being here today. We have a beautiful state and a beautiful city, and to take care of where we live and to be responsible about our future and to not leave our kids big financial and ecological problems to deal with, we need to remain committed to clean energy policies that do not deepen our dependency on fossil fuels, oil drilling, or fracking. Fracking threatens our water supplies here in the state and in the region. The whole point of fracking is to fracture, that's where it comes from, fracking, is to fracture limestone layers where our aquifer sits, putting Florida's unique karst geography and hydrology at risk. And if the high pressure injection alone doesn't work, then Florida's dirty fracking industry figured out that they could also dissolve the limestone layer with acidic chemicals. And if they really had their way, the public would never get to find out what those chemicals in our groundwater are, just so they can protect their so-called trademark chemical secrets. Incidentally, karst topography is very interesting. It's fragile, it's complex, it's layers of carbonate, it's limestone. It's why we have sinkholes and caverns. We can trace the way that water moves through karst topography through dice tracer studies. And these studies show that contaminants that are brought on by fracking can reach irrigation and drinking water systems even before a public health warning system could be issued. There's too many unknowns and there's too much risk. The report today also refers to wastewater that leaks from fracking retention ponds that contaminate groundwater sources as well. Here in Tampa Bay, like most of Florida, we used to rely primarily on groundwater as our sole source of drinking water. The pressures to find clean, affordable, adequate water is only increased with our added population and the stressors of climate change. So why would we bank on fracking? Why would we allow it in our state and jeopardize a human resource so precious? Clean water is a right, it's a human need. We need it to survive just like the air we breathe. And in Florida, clean water will determine how and where we grow as a state. I mentioned climate change, and fracking impacts that as well. A National Academy of Sciences report cited that St. Pete is one of 10 studied cities. St. Pete is one of 10 cities worldwide, most in the crosshairs of climate change impacts. That is a list that you don't want to be on. Real estate losses are a big part of how that's measured, but property damage isn't the only asset at risk either. So in context of fracking, as detailed in this report, methane is the primary climate culprit. Methane is by far a more potent contributor to global warming even than carbon dioxide. It's a much more destructive molecule in the atmosphere when it comes to its ability to trap heat. Carbon is easier to regulate, so we can focus on what's within our control. But methane releases are unpredictable, dangerous, and tricky. Over a 100-year time frame, a pound of methane has 34 times the heat-trapping effect of a pound of carbon dioxide. Methane is even more potent relative to the time that it's in the atmosphere, and it's more potent at a shorter time scale, at least 86 times more potent over a 20-year period. So whether it's the intentional venting of methane into the atmosphere or accidental gas releases, it constitutes a very scary threat to climate change that makes protecting our future more precarious and more unpredictable. Multiple studies have found high methane leakage rates at fracked wells. We do not want this in our state. The bottom line is that fracking and the storage or transportation of fracking wastewater, it's not compatible with our city's commitment to sustainability, our city's commitment to resiliency, our city's commitment to completing a climate action plan. It's not compatible with our city's beginning efforts to divest from fossil fuel funds and our city funds. It undoes all of the good work that we're just starting to do, whether it's planting trees, designing complete streets, or implementing energy efficiency in our buildings and fleets. St. Pete, make no mistake about it, is on the front lines of the worst consequences of sea level rise and climate change. We need to be doing everything we can here to move away from dirty fossil fuels and towards renewable energy. And that's why St. Pete, with the leadership of Steve Cornell, Carl Nurse, and all of my colleagues and the mayor, it's why St. Pete is joining cities across the nation from Fort Collins, Colorado, to Denton, Texas, and moving forward with the ban on fracking. It's time to show our political and policy leadership on clean energy solutions. Thank you. And with that, I hand it back to Jennifer.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice. Now, in addition to the global warming impacts of climate change, our report also found that between 2005 and 2015, fracking used over 23 billion pounds of toxic chemicals. Fracking uses vast quantities of these chemicals known to harm human health. People living or working nearby can be exposed to these chemicals if they enter drinking water, or if there's a spill that happens, or if they become airborne. And so I'm really happy to have Dr. Les Cole, a longtime physician here in Pinellas County and founder of St. Pete Health and Wellness. Dr. Cole is here to talk about fracking's public health impacts.
Thank you, Jennifer. My name is Dr. Cole. and I'm a medical doctor. I practice functional medicine here in St. Petersburg, Florida, at St. Petersburg Health and Wellness. And functional medicine is about finding the underlying causes for disease. And once they're found, we can do things to remedy them and help to improve people's lives and health. Toxic chemicals, unfortunately, are a huge contributor to disease processes, and the way that they work is that they disrupt biochemical processes in your cells, and they disrupt communication between your cells. So if you imagine you're working in at a job where it's really important to communicate with other employees in order to be very productive, and all of a sudden that communication gets disrupted, what do you think is going to happen to that business? Over time, they're going to lose money and they're going to become bankrupt. The same thing happens to your body. Over time, the communication disruption leads to disease and oftentimes bankruptcy financially, as well as bankruptcy of life. So preventing exposure to these damaging chemicals is the best medicine. It's much easier to prevent exposure than it is to remove toxic chemicals from the body, although that's one of the things that we do. And as a health professional, I have serious concerns about fracking and fracking wastewater. They are known causes for many disease states. The chemicals that are involved, some of them have been mentioned, but I want to mention some others. Chemical components of fracking fluids. First, I want to talk about the various diseases that they can or have been linked to. Cancer, hormone disruption, developmental issues, neurologic disease, and immune dysfunction. And these are only the components that we know about. Unfortunately, the fracking industry has what's known as proprietary information that keeps many of the chemicals that they use secret, and so we don't know what it is that we're dealing with from a health standpoint. For me, that begs the question, what else are we exposed to? What toxins are out there that we don't know about? And I think that that's a serious question, and that there should be requirements put in place that require the industry to make transparent all of the chemicals that they use in the process. Some of the volatile compounds and other toxins that are used in fracking and produced by fracking are xylene, toluene, benzene, ethylbenzene, formaldehyde, hydrochloric acid, hydrogen sulfide, and a number of others, but also heavy metals released from the earth, including lead, cadmium, and arsenic. And there are no allowable limits for arsenic. Arsenic is always toxic at any level. So people living in regions people living around the wells where fracking occurs are exposed to high levels of toxic substances in the air and in the water. And in support of this, a study done last year showed that in areas where people were exposed to higher levels from living in the area, that there was an increased risk of hospitalization for heart disease, neurologic disease, skin disease, kidney and bladder disease, and cancer. Cancer. Oftentimes there's no coming back from cancer. Many other conditions we have relatively good cures for, but cancer is not one of those. And so this study showed that the people who live nearest the wells and the people who live in the highest concentration of fracking wells had the highest rates of hospitalization for the disease that I just listed. These toxins and the diseases that they cause aren't just a matter of academic information. These things destroy finances, they destroy people's homesteads, they destroy the hopes, dreams, aspirations, and lives of entire families in one stroke. And so I am really thankful that the city of St. Petersburg is moving forward with an ordinance to ban fracking and fracking wastewater in St. Petersburg, in our community. I was born in St. Petersburg, grew up here. I love this city, and I want it to be around for my kids and my grandkids. So with that said, I personally want to thank the members of the City Council, the entire City Council, and the Mayor for moving forward on this. I know that the city has a commitment to keeping St. Petersburg healthy, and that is one of the mission statements of St. Petersburg Health and Wellness. So we're working together. I also want to thank Jennifer and Environment Florida for their efforts in helping to keep our state healthy. And lastly, I would like to thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cole. Now, in addition to the public health impacts of fracking, our report also found, and get ready for this, at least 239 billion gallons of water that have been used in fracking since 2005. That's an average of 3 million gallons per well. Fracking requires huge volumes of water for each well that's often needed for other uses like agriculture or people. Or to maintain healthy aquatic ecosystems. And a lot of times that water cannot be reused. In addition, fracking wells produced at least 14 billion gallons of wastewater in 2014 alone. Fracking wastewater has leaked from retention ponds, it's been dumped into streams and escaped from faulty disposal wells. It's put our drinking water at risk. Wastewater from fracked wells includes not only the toxic chemicals that Dr. Cole mentioned, injected into the well, but it can also bring up naturally occurring radioactive materials to the surface. And now just to put this into, again, a context that hopefully most folks can understand, fracking wells have produced enough gallons of toxic wastewater to fill Tropicana Field 22 times, if you'll see in the image below. Now we have here Rick Hamilton, who's the owner of Creative Soul Studio here in St. Petersburg, who's here to talk about the implications of fracking for our drinking water, but really also for our businesses. Rick?
Thank you, Jennifer. Some of you may know me as the owner of Creative Soul Studio here in St. Pete. It's a gourmet coffee shop, and like all food and beverage industries, our business and our livelihood is dependent on an adequate supply of clean, available drinking water. If we don't have clean, available drinking water, guess what? No coffee. People may have forgotten already about the drought that there was in 2000, 2002. I haven't forgotten the scenes of sinkholes opening up because there was no water. The scenes of reservoirs running dry all across the state. Jennifer just mentioned that the fracking industry uses 3 million gallons of water. Just think about how much water that is, 3 million gallons of water per well. The energy producers want to put out hundreds of wells, thousands if they get their way. Where are we going to get our water from? Florida's two main, to my knowledge, I can be corrected, industries for revenue production are agriculture and tourism. Both of those industries are predicated on water. We start pumping out the water that we're using for agriculture and our water supply. Sorry, no water for the tourists. You can buy water. You can't drink oil, you can't drink natural gas. The risk of fracking is too great to let it happen. They say, oh, it's safe. Studies show